and turn it over to Yara.
Awesome. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Faith, as well, for reaching out to us about doing this event and getting it going after all the COVID craziness. So to start off, we wanted to kind of introduce Elastic to everybody. I know it's not a name that maybe everybody's familiar with, so I'll just share my screen here. And let's see, hope that this works. All right, are you all able to see that? Awesome. All right, so what is Elastic exactly? So Elastic is a search company. And I'm sure when you hear me say that, you're probably thinking of the search bar, but it's a lot more than that. If you think about it, search kind of powers a lot of your daily interactions. So it's probably easiest to give a few examples. So if you've ever hailed a ride on Uber, Elastic is what powers the marketplace connecting you to your driver. And then if you're like me, when I started, I was surprised to see how many of these names on here I recognize that are powered by Elastic. So Home Depot uses Elastic for their product search and various visualizations. Adobe indexes their photos, fonts, documents, etc. So it's pretty amazing what people are using our open source code for. Let me see. Oh, there we go. So digging in a little bit more, what does Elastic offer? We offer 3 different solutions: search, observability, and security. And security is the solution that me and Tanisha primarily work in. And all these 3 solutions are powered by what's commonly known as the ELK stack. So at the bottom, you have your data ingestion layer. Elasticsearch is where you index all these documents, and then Kibana is where you visualize all this data that you are ingesting. All right, so that's a quick overview. I'm gonna shoot it over to Tanisha to talk a little bit more about the security solution in particular, since that's more our area.
Thank you, Yar. Hello, my name is Tanisha Turner. I'm an Elastic Stack Support Engineer here. I'm Elastic, and I want to tell you briefly about, as Yara had indicated, as far as Elastic is a company, is a search company foremost, but over the years, in the past year, we have built up a security solution. It's first started off with Elastic SIEM. Elastic SIEM was our first start off with the security, and as we acquired Endgame October 2019, when we first introduced our Endgame team, then we eventually became Elastic Endpoint Security solution that we have incorporated into our organization. And hold on, and I'm going to share my screen here. Just a moment. Seem to be having some technical problems, and you may have to go to the slide because it seems like it's
okay. No worries.
Okay, so first of all, Elastic Endpoint Security is one of our products that actually we end up having it to become open source, where you can actually do open source with Elastic Endpoint Security. And our first point with the security solution is, let's see. My apologies, having some technical problems, seems to be. Okay, we have a unified protection for everyone. Elastic Security actually helps our analysts prevent, detect, and respond to threats. It's free and it's open, enabling SIEM, endpoint security, threat hunting, cloud monitoring, and more. Now that since we're on 7.9, 6.1 now, and eventually we're going to migrate to where we're going to have 710. But now that we actually have to where it offers an AV solution where we actually detect malware, which is, we're really excited about that here at Elastic. Our endpoint security solution comes with customized autonomous prevention and is powered in detection and response. And we were built actually for hybrid cloud environments as well. And we're recognized by MITAR attack. If anyone doesn't know about MITAR attack, there's a MITAR attack framework that has, and it encompasses a lot of security frameworks. So we're actually we actually have that incorporated in our product as well. And with the security, security starts at the endpoint. And when we mean by it starts at the endpoint, we're talking about ransomware prevention, phishing prevention, malware prevention, exploit prevention, and reflex prevention, and flawless prevention. So that's where security starts. It starts at the core, at the endpoint. And in order to secure your environment, then you have to have those type of agents to prevent these type of attacks from infiltrating your environment. And one of the things that you can do is you can join the Elastic security community. You can and we have a demo site where you can take a quick spin of the demo, and then you can try our free on cloud, and then you can actually connect on our community as well. So you can do that as well here at Elastic. An Elastic at a glance, we have our company has over 2,100 plus elasticians. When I started in February 2018, we were not even 1,000. I believe I was actually employee 899 at Elastic, which tells you how small we were. We were still at a startup culture, but now it's 2,100 plus, and we're still growing. And we have probably, our product downloads are over 500 million plus. Plus we have like 12K plus of cloud subscriptions as well. And of course, with me and my colleague, Yara. We both have stories that we'd like to share. But before we share that, we want to actually have a little exercise that we want to do as far as inherent biasness and how do we as people, we have this inherent biasness in people that we identify with. So we want to do a little exercise with that as well. So I'm gonna turn it over to Yara, and Yara, we're gonna start this exercise.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tanisha. So when we were preparing for this, we talked about various different exercises that we could do to kind of break the ice and get the conversation going. So please feel free to jump in at any point, share your thoughts. Please don't be shy. And that's coming from an introvert. So really don't be shy. All right, so it's pretty quick, just in your head or on paper. If you jot down or think of 5 names of the people who you trust most outside of immediate family members. And I'll just give 1-2 minutes. All right, we good to go? Awesome. So the next part is just, I'm gonna mention certain categories, and if you and anybody on your list share that category, then just put a tick next to them. So for example, if I say gender, I would put a tick next to anybody identifies female, so anybody that's female on my list. So first category would be gender. Next, age. Profession. ethnicity, race, native language, and that's it for the categories I'll mention. So next, like, and I can do this with you, Tanisha, we can discuss it as well, is kind of like, what do you notice about the ticks on your list? So, I'll happily share what I had when I did the exercise. So I had a lot of ticks, meaning that the people that I had on my list were those who I had most things in common with, a lot of similarities with, which isn't bad. That makes sense that we kind of go towards things we know, things we're comfortable with. But it was just interesting in thinking about in kind of our inherent bias when, for example, if you're part of the interview process, right, just knowing that you inherently tend to migrate towards people, ideas that you're most comfortable with. So, like, Tanisha, did you find anything when we did that exercise?
Yes, yes, Yara, and thank you. This was a good exercise. I found during that exercise that I identified with people of ethnicity, same ethnicity, and gender. So there, I do have an inherent bias and that's why I say we as human beings all do have an inherent bias. So that was one of the things I identified with.
Yeah, awesome. So that was we just wanted to do a little icebreaker. I don't know if anybody else wants to share any thoughts.
I will share that it took me a while to think before I could come up with 5 people outside of my family. But, there are some straight down the line similarities between all 5. And, my closest girlfriends or my closest friends are women, and we have a whole lot in common, but I didn't grow up with either of them. They're both from other sides of the country, but if you stood us next to each other, we look like sisters.
Yeah, so it's something I've been taking into account as I've been entering kind of the interviewing pipeline and stuff like that, of how we think about how we form our teams, who we how we evaluate others as well. So we can dive in. Tanisha, do you want to take the first question? Nope, I think you're muted.
Sure. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead with the first
All right.
question.
Let me just grab here. All right. So just, I guess, to get started, if you could give us some background, like, how did you get started in tech? How did you grow your career?
Oh, thank you, Yara. My first experiences in terms of starting with tech. I started off as in help desk. I started off in help desk, at SAIC. That was my first experience starting in tech. And then I actually studied. I studied at Rasmussen College, where I pursued and got my associates in network security and bachelor's in information security. My first experience was at help desk. And from help desk, I went to become an administrator, a combination of a Linux administrator and in security operations. And that's how I actually got introduced to the security function and started my security career. And I will share this a little background as far as being a woman in tech, which I think is very, very important. Being a woman in tech has been challenging, but first and foremost, I will say the biggest challenge and obstacle that I have encountered in tech is being a Black female in tech, and especially being in an area here in East Tennessee, being in East Tennessee, of course, which is is not as diverse with technology as far as having people of color in tech, but most of foremost have having black people in tech and black females in tech and in cybersecurity. So that was my first introduction as far as the challenges and overcoming any type of obstacles. And what I will say, this my first, and this is actually a very challenging experience to share, but I believe this is important because this will actually may help others, and this will help others to know that no matter what obstacles that you face, that you can overcome, no matter what prejudices that you will be faced with, and you will be faced with some, that you can persevere and overcome these challenges. My first experience that I had, which I'd like to share, is when I first worked at a company, and I'm not going to say the company's name at this point, but my hosts, Nina and Yara, they know which company it is. My first experience in cybersecurity, it was with this company. It was a small organization, and the organization had not had any type of diversity. I was the first Black that was in technology, and I was the first female that they had as far as in cybersecurity, but they've never in their history that they had been open for 20 years, they had never had a Black in tech, and of course not, let alone a Black female cybersecurity person. And my first encounter, my first day at this job, I was told there was 2 security engineers, and they had said to our small team, please do not train her because of who she is. She's only here to fill a spot because of not having diversity. And I was not trained, I was ostracized. And then about a few months later, the owner of the small organization had me come to his office, and he told me, he said, you're very intelligent. He says, but you were actually hired here to fill a role. He said, your kind does not belong in cybersecurity. His exact words was, my kind does not belong in cybersecurity. And I asked him, what do you mean by that? He said, your kind does not belong in cybersecurity. I said, are you saying my race? And then he tried to backtrack and said, I wasn't saying that, but we knew exactly what he meant. And so I could have sued them, but I didn't, and I left. But I realized something, that my vengeance was not by suing and actually giving them the energy and the publicity. My vengeance was my survival, and my success has been my vengeance. And I want any young person, any person coming into the field who is a person of color, but most of all, a black in tech, I want you to know that you will have some of these obstacles, maybe not as harsh as the one that I encountered, to where in my experience, but despite on what you go through and what you will encounter, I want you to know that you can persevere, that you can overcome those challenges. And don't let anyone dictate where you're going, no matter what obstacles come into your way, you just remember that you can survive that. Because despite anyone's perception, and despite anyone's racism and trying to hinder, they cannot hinder your success unless you let them. And I will go as far as say this: when you think about quitting, don't give up. Remember that your struggle is your strength. Struggle is your survival. Struggle is your strength. Struggle is not, and struggle and pain, that's not a failure, and that's not anything down. You take that and you use that as your strength to overcome any obstacle. And don't worry about what somebody tells you. And your race or your gender, and I will say this: race or gender does not define your intelligence, and it does not define your capability to be successful in technology. And I'll say that to all women, all people of color, and all black women and men, that you're intelligent, equally intelligent, if not more. So don't let anyone tell you that because of who you are, whoever, with your ethnicity or your gender, that does not define or constitute how successful that you will be in this field. And remember this, if you ever think about quitting, think about, as Black Americans, think about this: our ancestors has endured a lot of atrocities to pave the way of opportunities to get us here. So when you quit, you think about your grandmother, your great grandmother, all those people, all the blood, sweat, and tears that got us to this point, and lives were lost just to have to pave the way for opportunities for us. So that's what I want to share with everyone. It doesn't matter who you are or your place or where you come from. That does not define your success or your future.
Nice. That was awesome. I don't know how I can follow that up. um, but I can go a bit into kind of how I got into tech as well. And one thing that I guess I would point out is that when we were discussing kind of our experiences, Tanisha and I, one of the topics that we got into was transactionality. So how different characteristics characteristics and experiences affect how you navigate the world. And in our case, we were talking specifically about the tech industry. So for example, on my end, I'm half Hispanic, half white, and identify as queer. So obviously those are all things that you could map into different marginalized groups. But my experience has been different in a lot of ways. Like if I haven't felt safe, I'm able to kind of hide or not bring up those things that kind of make me feel marginalized, as opposed to Tanisha, like with your experiences, right? Like your race is not something that you can bypass. So that was really interesting when we were talking about our different experiences. So on my end, I went to college for political science. I had always had an interest in math and science, but was one of those that got weeded out, unfortunately. I just really didn't find a community in math and science in college that I felt comfortable in, and I veered towards kind of I guess a genre where I saw more people like me. And when I graduated college, I had thought about going into politics, policy side, and kind of chose to follow really my passion. So I've been coding on the side just for fun. I never thought I would actually do anything with it because I was like, I don't have a computer science degree. I haven't taken any actual courses. There's no way that I'll actually ever get paid for this. But I ended up working a few years, not in tech, to earn a bit of money, and then did a boot camp that helped kind of accelerate my skills. And the whole point was to try and get a foot in the door in the tech world. And even there, I think I was out of 30, there were 2 women. And that was pretty much with every cohort. There were 1 or 2 women, if any. So again, like as soon as you enter the tech world, you notice that you're different. And yeah, and I luckily have been able to kind of find my place within Elastic. Obviously, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen, but I love how aware the company is of the importance in diversity in tech.
Absolutely, Yara, and I believe that's important too. That we all see that even in tech, there is biasness, and that now that that's why diversity is very important in tech, because you have people, especially people who interview others. You have interviewers who are just comprised of a small subset of people, and I think it's important with organizations to have more diverse group of an interview panel, and each organization has even what we call employee resource groups to have a diverse group of interviewers to interview candidates, because even in the process. I believe that you even had an experience like when you're interviewing a candidate, you as a female interviewing a candidate, then that candidate may not respond to you if you don't look like them. So that's another thing too that we bring. That's a problem too in the tech industry, and that's why we see diversity as something that should be at a prime point.
Yeah, I'm just curious, has anybody here, is anybody like currently facing any mental blockers or anything in getting into tech, or switching roles or careers or anything like that? Just like, for example, like I mentioned, like one of the bigger things for me was just not feeling good enough because I didn't do any computer science degree. I didn't have that background. Um, and I knew even just being a woman, I was already a minority in that sense.
I definitely had that in the past, trying to interview in the Bay Area, because I also didn't have a computer science degree, and I took a few courses at the community college, and luckily my professor was amazing, and he kind of used it as his class as a recruiting tool. But I didn't end up working for his company, but he helped me get a position with another company. And like, if it weren't for him, I don't know if I would have had that job, because I remember going into his office like after I got hired, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And he's like, yes, you can. But then after I got laid off from that position, which was not through no fault of my own, they actually like outsourced some of the work and made some pretty terrible business decisions. Just looking, like you were talking about the interviews, like it was all like white men, which I am white, but like, men, it's the comments I got from people, like some of them were like, oh, it would be so cool to have a woman on our team. I'm just like, well, I kind of appreciate that, but it's also, but also just like I go to meetups and a lot of people would say like, oh, are you in HR? I'm like, and when I said, no, I'm a developer, they'd be like, what? Like, yeah, so it was definitely a challenge. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know this was in the San Francisco Bay Area, like 6-7 years ago. So I don't know what it's going to be like in the Charleston area now, but I really appreciate groups like this where I can actually have these conversations with other people that have gone through this. And yeah, it's just really nice to have that. So thank you for sharing your experiences.
Yeah, definitely. And there's kind of the other side to it. So like once you are in a position you want to be in, making sure that you're part of that interviewing process, and have a say in how the team is built out and the culture that's made. Tanisha, did you want to touch on one of our next slides?
Yes, Yara, let's talk about, we have something what we call about intersectionality, and that's something that is more of a way of thinking that takes into consideration for perspectives and experiences of individuals from underrepresented groups and marginalized populations. So, and what we wanted to, there actually is an interesting diagram that we had found about called the wheel of power and privilege, and we found this from Sylvia Duckworth on her Twitter page, and what that encompasses is it actually talks about it has the wheel. Go ahead and show that Yara, but it shows the wheel as far as of different groups. It's divided into different groups, and with those different groups, it shows the ones on the top that are more marginalized, and then in the middle of that wheel we have what we call people in power, who, and despite if you are part of one of those marginalized groups, and if you're closer to that middle wheel as far as being in power, then you actually have more power and privilege than than the marginalized groups. So this is an interesting concept, because even though, hey, you could belong to one of those groups, as far as, say, for instance, if you belong to a group as that you're slim, that you're slim, but if you're still part of that marginalized group, then you're still at the top of the wheel as far as being marginalized. If you're part of being undocumented, dark, or a different race or anything, then you're still part of that higher marginalized group, no matter if you have an excerpt of power from the power of privilege wheel. So this is a very interesting concept that we have. And when you look at if you look at the top of this, where we have gender, and then if you go down towards the middle, you have that power. Okay, now if anyone can look, is that in the middle of that center of that power, who has the most power in the center? In the center, when you look at it, you have people who are citizens, and you have people who are white and post-secondary. Those are the people who have the most power. So even if you belong to one of these other groups that are adapted from culture that we considered as far as being marginalized, you still have more of a power rank, and if you're part of that middle group. So this is something that we found that was very interesting, and that when you think about it, no matter what that you're going through, okay, say for instance, you're female. If you're female and you're from the power portion, like say, for instance, you're a white female with a post-secondary, you still have a certain amount of power and privilege, regardless of gender, because you're not part of that higher marginalized group. So even though gender may be a hindrance to some degree, you still have power and privilege, and more power and privilege than you realize. And that even brings up to a focus as far as, even when we think about corporate roles, and when we talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of companies, when they think about diversity and inclusion, the first thing that they go for is gender. They don't see diversity as including some of those other marginalized groups. It's all gender focused. And the first group that they derive and they pull their pool of candidates is from the white female group is one of the groups that they pull for, and that's what considered diversity. And even though you have other marginalized groups, people of color, and then undocumented citizenship, a lot of companies don't pull their candidates from that, because they don't see that's not at their highest point. Their highest point is highest focus is towards more of the people with what they see consider that have the power and privilege. And that goes to show, even with people who look like us, even if people are different gender, then we actually, there is an inherent biasness of people that look like us. Yeah, and then you have all these other types that it included. So that was something that was very interesting to us. So that's something that we can all look at, like, hey, where do I stand and where do I fit into this group? So even if you have a different body type and everything, or shape, or if you're classified into being mentally ill, then if you're part of that bigger circle group, then you have more power and privilege than a person who identifiably cannot escape that, because we can't escape regardless. We can't escape race. We can't escape ethnicity. Some of the other parts, yes, I mean, you are part of that group to where it would be considered marginalized, but there are other parts where you just can never escape. So I just thought we just thought that was interesting, something interesting to share. And that's something interesting that organizations can share as well, is that even with the hiring candidates, if you have people from all these different intersectional groups, then you will then your diversity and inclusion actually becomes a lot better, and your company becomes more diverse if you pull from this different pool of candidates. But the problem is we tend to only be biased and focused towards people who look like us, and that's what's the problem that we're seeing with tech is, and that's why we're not seeing as much diversity as we'd like in organizations. But at Elastic, I will say at Elastic, we're actually making a lot of improvements. We've actually have some diversity initiatives that we've been focusing on internally and everything. And so and we have ER groups as well. So that's something that we as a company have been trying to make an attempt and doing better. And we have been taking small steps. And I would tell any organization this, it's not going to happen overnight, but if you just take the smallest step and at least and seek out other resources, seek out and see what other companies are doing as far as how are they improving their diversity in hiring. What are they doing differently? How are they approaching candidates from underrepresented groups? And that's something that as a people, as an organization, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad we have this meetup, is that to bring this to focus to organizations that there's always room for improvement. And I see even on LinkedIn, I've seen so many open to work, and a lot of these candidates are from underrepresented groups. So and there's not a shortage of candidates. I see companies say that they don't have enough qualified people. Well, it's because they're looking in the wrong place. You can't just pull from the white young guy with the hoodie. You can't just pull from him, or a white middle-aged white guy. There's other candidates that from underrepresented groups that have the talent. But if you have that biasness to where you're not thinking about them, or you don't want to pull from that pool, then you're not going to have a diverse organization.
And I think the kind of what you mentioned, the kind of the first steps is recognizing those biases in order to kind of start mitigating those steps. But one question I wanted to touch on was kind of what you would suggest, or what we would suggest for people who are trying to break into tech. Like, are there specific groups that you've joined? I know for me, like when I moved to Charleston, I did join this group, and just knowing that there was that group out there that I could turn to was a big help. Like, even though I didn't make it out to as many events as I wanted to, just having that presence. So again, like seeing that, right, that there can be Black engineers, there's gay engineers, there's that seeing someone like you out there is just so helpful.
I would recommend to anyone who is wanting to attempt to get into tech. The first step is, if they want to find, they can seek out some of these groups that are specifically for underrepresented groups. Like, for example, there are a lot of organizations. I mean, we have, of course, women in tech, but if you're from one of the underrepresented groups, like underrepresented ethnicity groups, then we have Blacks in tech. We have the Black Engineers Association. We have a lot of different underrepresented groups that, I mean, so I would actually, my advice would be for anyone to seek out one of those special interest groups to join and network. And then there's even ones that there's even international consortium of minority professionals. There's a group as well, and that encompasses all minorities. But that's what I would recommend anyone to seek out the special interest groups first, and you can find them. There's so many out there you can do a search, and you can find so many of them out there. And even you have Black Twitter, that's actually one to where you can network to, and Blacks in Tech. And then there's for other Blacks groups, there's Blacks in Cybersecurity. It's called BIC. That's an organization, and that's one I'm proud to be part of. And being an ambassador in it and everything. So that's another organization that you can go to. Then we have BDPA, Black Data Processing Association. That's another group. And there's a lot of different various groups you belong to. And then you can expand your network. And if you're female, you can expand your network. Women in cybersecurity. There's actually a lot of different subsets of women in cybersecurity. and we have women in tech, and then there's even women in tech in local cities and towns. Of course, you know, there's one globally, then there's one nationwide. And like, if you're part of Charleston, reach out to Nina, Women in Tech, reach out to her, and she can even help with some of those resources as well. That's why I think this is very important. A lot of times people don't understand or know the first step into getting into it. And getting in tech, first off, can be very intimidating when you're trying to reach out and trying to seek mentorship. And that's another thing too, network, seek and find a mentor. But the first step in, when you're trying to attempt to find a mentor, a lot of times it's hard because you have a lot of seasoned and tenured people in technology that tell you that they don't have time. So your first step is to start networking and expand your network. Once you network and get to know, then you can seek out mentorship. And that's why I believe a lot of these organizations, that these special interest organizations, are important, because they even have people in those organizations. Like, I do mentoring. I have like probably about 3 mentors right now then one of them is going to be their own mentor, going to be doing mentorship pretty soon. But I just think that's important, is just to go ahead and network, and then be part of special interest groups, and then seek out a mentor. And even your mentor doesn't have to be local. All my mentors actually have been in other cities. When I first started off in tech, my mentor was in Charlotte, North Carolina, you know, and here I was in Tennessee. I was so intimidated when I first got in, and that was part of, and I joined BDPA, and that's what helped me. And finally I built up my network, and then I started having more mentors from other areas. You know, I have mentors who've been in an industry for 20, 25 years. And actually I may have a new mentor pretty soon. Hint, hint, Nina.
Yeah, I would say the networking part was huge for me and still is. Like when I was getting started, one thing I would do is go on LinkedIn and find engineers that kind of looked like me, were like me. So for me, like I would look for queer engineers, and those were the ones that I felt comfortable reaching out to. So just finding really as simple as going on LinkedIn and looking at people who are in positions that you want to be in, and asking how did they get there? What can I do? And it is scary, but I think that the network portion is so huge. That's really how I've heard about most of the opportunities that I'd gotten, was through word of mouth.
And absolutely, I think that's important. What we want to close, and we want to turn this to the audience of anyone that has any questions that they want to ask Yara or myself, or even Nina. And this is open. We want to make this informal. This is open forum. So any questions that you may have from Yara, please feel free to jump in. And I understand people may be shy, but go ahead. We're friendly here.
So I'm curious actually to hear a little more about mentorship and like what, because I keep hearing it all over the place. And then I've done some Googling, what does a mentor do? And it's all like, it doesn't all apply to me. It feels like a lot of them are looking for like more traditional positions and things like that. So I'd love to hear more about what you actually do and like what kind of commitments you're asking for. If you're like, I don't know, I just don't really know what a mentor does. So it'd probably make it a little easier to ask.
Nina, go ahead.
Charleston Women in Tech has a mentorship program that's rolling right now. So I will connect you with our person who's running that, and she can totally get you downloaded. It's very informal. And, you know, we have seen relationships start and grow for, you know, 3 and 4 years. And people have been guided in their careers, and it's been very successful for us. But I think ultimately for our program, it's as much or as little as you and the person that's mentoring you want to do. We are also doing this particular year, we're doing Mentor of the Month. So we're in order to let a lot of other people see a lot of people and connect. We have mentors who were, you know, the last one we had for October was Tanya Davis, and she will mentor anyone who needs certification or education mentorship, like, you know, people who need to know what they need to know. We had last month in September, we had Christina Locke, who runs the biggest tech recruitment company here in Charleston, help people with their resumes. So, you know, and so they are available for the entire month for anyone who attended that has questions or wants some feedback. So, you know, we're doing it in all kind of different ways, but I will connect you for sure if you want to just, you know, chat me your contact, and I'll connect you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I went to the resume workshop, but I didn't realize you had a whole program for it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask myself, Yara or Nina, about being in tech, getting in tech, and what steps to take, or anything else?
I have a question, Tanisha. This
Sure.
is Faith.
Hey, Faith.
So I think that, at least, and thank you for the presentation. I think it's so important for us all to take some time to recognize all the privileges that we have or don't have. And I liked the exercise that you guys started with. And throughout the presentation, wheels were kind of turning in my own head. And I feel like when we talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of focus is on the interviewing process, about what it's like when you're looking for a role and maybe not feeling represented, especially within tech. That happens, you know, for many people and who are members of marginalized groups. But I'm curious for your thoughts, and Yara's thoughts too, on how do we make a company more inclusive of everybody? I mean, obviously I know a little bit about what we do at Elastic as an Elastic employee, but I'd love to hear from either of you what actions you either have seen within Elastic, or that you'd like to see for any company to take on to make this space more comfortable for folks, and more welcoming to people with various marginalized identities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's actually a very good question, because since at Elastic we have internal program initiatives that we're putting in place, and that's different. It's going to be different from every company. But I believe externally, for people who are not for companies that are not non-Elastic, I believe the first step that I would like to see, and what we can do, and this is another thing too, is that a lot of times companies do not know the first step on how do I go about having a diversity and inclusion program. What can I do? What is the first step I need to do? Okay, first step that you need to do is you can reach out and look at and get ideas from other organizations, even if and a lot of organizations are actually a little bit hesitant about doing that. But I know, even with some of our hiring people at Elastic, and even with our HR and everything, you can reach out to other organizations just to get an idea and exactly what are they putting in place. But for me, and if I was an employee, for me and anyone on this call who's an employee and not part of HR, I believe the first step that I would do as far as getting your own company to be more inclusive is I would go to the HR or the global recruiting, and I would ask them, hey, if we're trying to be diverse and inclusive company, what are we doing? First of all, why don't we reach out to some of these marginalized groups and organizations, like these nonprofit organizations, like we do have some of these special interest groups. Why don't we reach out to them and ask them if they want to be involved and educate us on how we can attract them, and how can we attract people from these different groups. So I think that's the first step, and very important, because even with organizations like, especially like, you know, you have some in particular like with Black engineers, and then you have you know, like I said, Blacks in tech. Then I mean, they each of these organizations that have been established, they usually have either a marketing and PR person, or they have a global organization person who actually reaches out and asks if they want to be a sponsor. So that's the first step. Is I think a lot of these companies, they can be sponsors to these special interest groups, and then they can go and be part of the recruitment process, and they can recruit from these special interest groups, or they can go to even colleges. Like there's a lot of HBCUs, historical Black colleges and university. If anyone didn't know what that is, you can go to these. They have recruitment days where you can recruit different people. So there's a lot of different plans that you can put in place to make it more diverse and inclusive. And once you join, though, or reach out to some of these special interest groups and not underrepresented groups, then you need to have your organization to at least have one person from these underrepresented groups be part of the interview process, because I believe that that is the main problem in technology, is that we don't see enough people who look like us. We have people that just come from one sector, which is usually, unfortunately, is usually the white male sector is usually part of the interview process. So we need people who are more diverse as far as being part of the interview panel. And then once you have that, and then implement some training. Non-biased training is another portion that you introduce in your organization. Then you can have more diverse and inclusive culture.
Yeah, so one thing I was really excited about when I joined Elastic was being part of an open source community. And I'm a numbers person, so I looked into diversity in open source. And one of the interesting things that was noted was that open source actually suffers even more in terms of diversity numbers, and it being less diverse in terms of those who kind of engage in the community. And I was trying to think of like why, at least for me, like Elastic doesn't feel that way, right? It feels very open to me. And one of the interesting points that was noted was having a code of conduct. So I think like Elastic has been very vocal about their values, right? Like we always say, no a-holes, right? Like regardless of how smart you are, also just being a good person. So kind of to answer your question, Faith, just being vocal about the company values, the community values, and setting those up. Again, like just having that visual representation, like people care, having it being talked about, makes it less scary to bring up. So I thought that was interesting, and having like the numbers backed up that open source projects that had clear codes of conduct had more women contribute to it.
And there was a point that was actually in a chat, which is actually an excellent point from Jay Miller, and that as far as there should also be representation in leadership as well, and it can be demoralizing if you don't feel like you can move up, which is an excellent point, Jay, and I'm actually glad you brought that up as well, because what happens is that yes, I mean, you definitely absolutely need representation in leadership. In order to have representation in leadership, you do need to have a diverse panel as well, because even if you think about it, if you look at the corporate America organization structure as a whole, who do you see at the top of that corporate America chain as far as leadership? And in most corporate America leadership roles, who do you see at the top of the chain? You don't see females. Females are a minority as well in corporate America, regardless of gender and regardless of race. And most of the corporate America structure is the white males. And especially in the top Fortune 500 companies. You do not see that representation. So I think it's very important that you, even in order to have leadership in those roles, first of all, they need to have somebody who's diverse to interview those people, to bring them in that roles. And that's the problem that we have, is that you can't have the leadership if you have leadership that has that inherent biasness and don't want to bring in people that they don't identify with. So that was an excellent point, and thank you for bringing that up. Yes, that's excellent. Does anyone else have any questions or comments or anything that they would like to interject here in our last few minutes, so as we wrap up?
I am curious if nobody else has any questions. I'm curious trying to figure out exactly how to word it. Like if I'm looking for a job, like I don't know if it's appropriate to ask like, hey, do you have any women on your interviewing team? Or like how many people, women or other minorities work at the company? Like how do you deal with that part? Because I'd like to know, but I mean, some of that information is probably available online, looking at their website and stuff. But like, is that appropriate to ask? Or maybe it will filter out the bad companies if they get mad. I don't know.
Well, Glassdoor is a good resource, and Nina actually put that in it. I always, when I apply for any company, I always look at the Glassdoor reviews before I apply to any organization and see exactly what the employees are saying. And another thing that you can do as well is you can actually ask prior, when the first recruiter calls you. I mean, I know a lot of people would be hesitant about this, and I would just ask. You can ask in a very professional manner. Is that what does your company organization look like as far as diversity and inclusion? You could just ask that. I mean, instead of asking like very bluntly, how many women and how many Blacks, how many Latino, how many Hispanics, I would say, how is your organization on diversity and inclusion? And do you have anything as far as what shows as far as your company's standards on diversity and inclusion? So the company's standards on diversity and inclusion would be the appropriate way and manner of going about and asking that question. But prior to interviewing and prior to applying for any company, always look at the Glassdoor reviews and always research the organization as a whole, and even connect with employees who are at the companies and everything as well. Just doing that small connection.
Yeah, and I have outright asked that question before, just in terms of like exactly like what Tanisha said. And I think you kind of mentioned it, that if depending on how they respond to you, that can be indicative of whether or not you're going to feel good at that company and welcome and be able to do your job. So I think it's a fair question to ask.
Absolutely. Absolutely indeed. Does anyone else have any questions or comment as we wrap up this wonderful discussion?
Well, if not, I just want to thank our speakers again this evening, Tanisha Turner and Yara Tercero. I'm sure that you would be welcoming any outreach through LinkedIn. If you have questions and you don't feel comfortable asking them here, or if something comes to you later and you would like to ask, I'm sure they would welcome your message. And we would, welcome everyone who's been here tonight, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Elastic, for providing such a great, robust conversation around equity, inclusion, and diversity in technology with two very, very talented and successful engineers. We treasure you and we support you and we applaud you for your success. And with that, I think we can close the meeting.
Well, thank you, Nina, and thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to my co-host, Yara, and thank you, Charleston Women in Tech. I mean, I appreciate the invite, and thank you everyone for attending, and my colleagues on the call, thank you for your support, and elasticians forever. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.